They say the only constant is changed. No two programs have changed more over the last 2 weeks than the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the USC Trojans. And look at that. They're on the schedule against each other this Saturday at the LA Coliseum. This game is college football unpredictability at its finest.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Now that we're getting towards the end of the season, you have folks kind of digging up those August predictions and those early September takes, and folks like me are taking some L's. And as it pertains to these two teams, there is certainly an L to take for yours truly. For those of you on podcast, I'll kind of recite it out. And for those of you on podcast, I got the massive L on my forehead. Gonna keep it here for just a little bit longer for those of you that want to screenshot this and for those of you that want to clip this, certainly, right now. But here's what it says. Is the world ready for a November 16th Nebraska at USC matchup with Big Ten title and CFP implications? Boy, how things have changed. We talked about change in the open, and things have certainly changed since I certainly sent the push the post button on this particular post as well. This kind of reminds me of Back to the Future that says, yeah, you're not ready for this quite yet, but maybe your kids will be. The world is not ready for Nebraska and USC to maybe be at that level, and the Huskers and the Trojans certainly aren't ready as programs to be at that level right now. But that kind of leads me into my next question. What the heck happened for both of these teams in Lincoln and Los Angeles? Like, when you look at these teams in F-plus rankings, and then you look at how these teams have played, it is very, very different. Like, USC is 20th in the country in F-plus. They are 14th in the country in OF-plus. If you would have told me back in September that says, hey, USC is going to be a top 20 team in the country analytically, they're going to have a top 15 offense in the country, I said, yeah, that makes sense. Lincoln Riley is a great offensive coach. This is a team, yeah, maybe if they lose a couple of games, their defense is improved, they're going to be in a lot of games, and they're going to kind of be sitting right there, maybe towards the back half of the top 25. But they're also sitting there with a 4-5 record with losses to Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington. Nebraska is 36th in the country in F+. They are 13th in the country in DF+, but they've lost 4 in a row, and morale is at a season low, certainly, for the fans in Lincoln, Nebraska. What's wrong with both teams? Now, I think both teams have had their fair share of issues up front on the offensive line. I'll touch on that a little bit more as it pertains to this game here in just a minute. But when you talk about the issues, USC's offensive line, I think, has led to the quarterback change. Miller Moss has gotten hit a lot. He's making quicker decisions and not necessarily in a good way. He's rushing through some of his progressions, and that's what led to the turnovers, specifically 3 interceptions against Washington in the last game that USC has played. The Trojans have had injuries on defense. Lincoln Riley refusing to run the football. We go back to that last game for USC against the Washington Huskies where their running backs, Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner, are averaging something like 5 yards, 5.5 yards a pop, but still 50 pass attempts from Miller Moss in that game up in the Pacific Northwest. When you shift gears and talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, they've had inconsistency on the defense. Like, you look, they've had some really good performances this season, which should be no surprise from a Tony White defense. You look at how this team played against Colorado, which that defensive performance looks pretty darn good right now, considering the way that Colorado has improved throughout the season. Look at their defensive performance against Ohio State and how they were able to keep the Buckeyes in check and how they were able to allow their offense and allow their team to possibly go into Columbus and come out with a victory. But there have been defensive performances that have not been up to the Nebraska standard as well. I look at that first loss of the season, that overtime loss to Illinois. How about, of course, everybody looks at that ultimate low for the Nebraska defense this year, and that's that loss to Indiana in which they gave up 56 points. Now, Indiana has put up a lot of points on a lot of people, but the Hoosiers put up their biggest and best offensive performance of the year against these Nebraska Cornhuskers. They have an inability to run the football. They are not in any sort of rhythm from a play calling perspective, and that's why we're going to be talking about Dana Holgorsen certainly here in a minute, and the offensive line depth issues have reared their ugly head. When Teddy Prohaska went down in preseason, I said, hey, if they get one more injury, things are going to they're going to get pretty thin. And things have gotten pretty thin. And once again, we're looking at the Nebraska offensive line as a big question, as a big concern right now for Nebraska, and a big reason why things have maybe gone the way they have from an offensive perspective. All right, I'm sick of looking at that graphic and that tweet, so let's get into the preview, why don't we? Changes in the air, folks. There is no more bigger changes going on right now than in Lincoln and Los Angeles. Let's start first with the Cardinal and Gold of the USC Trojans. Out is Miller Moss. In is Jaden Maeva, the transfer from UNLV. Here's the thing about Jaden. He's a big quarterback. He's a talented quarterback. You watch his film at UNLV, he's clearly got an arm on him. But here's also the thing about Jaden. He is a young quarterback. There were high peaks, lower valleys when you look at his film, when you look at his body of work at UNLV. And when you throw a young quarterback with a lot of pressure now for USC, there is pressure on Jaden Maeva for him to perform and to avoid the disaster of USC failing to get to bowl eligibility right now. When I look at Jaden, what's the best position that USC can put Jaden Maeva in? I think it's helping out this offensive line with some read plays, with some RPOs, with some designed quarterback run. I think you need to protect him a little bit. I think the last thing that you want to do, and I think Lincoln Riley knows this, I sure hope he knows this, but I think the last thing that you want to do is throw Jaden into a situation like you threw Miller Moss, where you're throwing it 40, 42, 45, God forbid, 50 times in a football game. That is not going to be Jaden Maeva's strength. I hope that Lincoln Riley sees this as an opportunity to really lean into this run game a lot more. He should have been doing that a month ago. But now you have a quarterback that is a part of his skill set, and it really wasn't part of Miller Moss's skill set. Now you put Maeva back there, you got Woody Marks, you got Quentin Joyner. Now all of a sudden, you got these three guys that can form a pretty darn good rushing attack, and they can hit you from a lot of different angles. So I hope that's kind of the formula that they bring out with Jaden Maeva. You look to the other side. Dana Holgorsen, he was an offensive consultant during the bye week. Matt Rule comes out and says, yeah, he's calling plays for us now. Yeah, he's the offensive coordinator. He's going to take over. He has an air raid background, put up some big numbers at Oklahoma State, at West Virginia, at Houston, at various spots during his coaching journey. I think for Dana Holgorsen, obviously, to have a great debut as the offensive coordinator, there's one key. Dylan Raiola needs to play. Of course, he had that injury a couple of weeks ago to the back late in the game against the UCLA Bruins. And Matt Rule said during his press availability this week, he says, well, he's going to try to practice this week, which wasn't exactly a super big vote of confidence. So obviously that's the big thing. If you're going with somebody like a Heinrich Haarberg as the backup quarterback in a game like this, I don't think Nebraska's going to be able to keep up offensively. Right? So, of course, the first thing, Dylan Raiola needs to be able to play in this game. And, man, this is something that Marcus Satterfield should have been doing all year long, but they need to try to get the run game going to make life easier for their quarterback. USC is 13th in the Big Ten right now against the run. Both offensive lines have struggled this season. They have struggled in pass protection. I think both Nebraska has struggled in run blocking. I think USC has done a solid job in run blocking this year. It's just Lincoln Riley is not leaning into that much from a play calling perspective. You look at this from Nebraska, they've given up 21 sacks this season, 4 sacks against UCLA, 7 tackles for loss so far this season. I mentioned earlier about the USC offensive line and how that has led to the troubles and the bad decision making and the turnovers that Miller Moss has had so far this season. And then that has led to him being QB2 and being on the bench. Now, when Nebraska's defensive line is good, they can wreak havoc. They can make a big difference against this USC offensive line, and especially against a young quarterback. That's a big key for me for Nebraska. They need those guys coming off the edge. They need those two guys that we know all about in the middle of that defensive line to get after it as well. They need to get into the face of Jaden Maeva. They need to push back. They can't let USC run the football. There is an opportunity that if Nebraska shows up with a really good defensive game plan, that they can have a really successful day on the defensive side of the football. Both defensive lines need to attack. They need to attack. I think both of these offensive lines are vulnerable right now. It is an adage as old as time. You've probably heard me say it so many times over, but I think when you look at the weaknesses that are these two offensive lines, I think the trenches are going to tell the story in this game to see which way this game goes in the end. And I think both teams need to be able to run the football and need to have success in run blocking to take pressure off of these young quarterbacks. There's I think, high probability that the loser of this game is going home for the holidays. They are going home during bowl season, because you kind of look at the way that these two teams are trending. You look at the trajectory of both the Huskers and the Trojans, right? If that kind of keeps on going downhill, you look at the last two games for each season, for each team, I think it's going to be a little bit more tough to be able to bounce back. Like, you look at this thing for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They're sitting there at 5-4. Now, because they have the extra win right now, it is a better probability that even if they do lose, they can still make a bowl game, but nothing's guaranteed, right? They got to play Wisconsin at home, Iowa on the road. I think the bigger concern right now is for USC. I think the ceiling for the Trojans this season is 6-6, because they got to play a college football playoff team in Notre Dame at the end of the season. But they also have a game at the Rose Bowl that now looks a little bit tougher than it did before, and that's that UCLA game, that Victory Bell game. That UCLA's playing some pretty good football right now. Like, I'll say it, if USC loses this game, they will not be going to a bowl game. You could see some desperation, some big-time desperation, and some big-time gambles, I think, from both of these teams because of these facts. This is a big-time spot, I think, for both of these teams sitting there right now. All right, folks, it is prediction time. And of all of the predictions that I made in the preseason and now in season, this is the least confident I have felt about any prediction that I have made. Considering the changes, considering where these teams are right now, I do not feel great about this pick. I don't feel great about certain things happening throughout this game. My prediction is USC getting the win 27-20. Of course, the news that came down this week, the passing of West Coast legend, USC legend John Robinson, and then they are also going to be donning those uniforms from the 1970s where John Robinson was able to have so much success. You got to imagine that USC is going to be juiced. They are going to be ready for this game. They are going to be ready to represent that Trojan pride that John Robinson did such a great job to establish during his time in Southern California. Now, is there a chance that Nebraska's defensive line really wreaks havoc and the young quarterback makes mistakes for USC? Absolutely. Is there a chance if Dylan Raiola plays this game that he can do just enough offensively with a good performance from that Tony White defense that they can win the game? Absolutely. Is there a chance that Jaden Maeva can provide a big-time spark in the run game and the throw game and provide more balance to this offense? Absolutely. Folks, there's a lot of variables to throw around in this game, but I've got the Trojans coming away with a victory. 9-point spread in favor of USC. Does Vegas think that Dylan Raiola is not going to play? That seems like a big spread for this game. At least that's what I think. But what do you think? Leave all of your Nebraska USC score predictions in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.